So, you want to play Curtain Call. Hello and welcome back to Pathfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Today's video is another video player's guide, this time focusing on the high drama, high roleplay, and high-level adventure path, Curtain Call. For those unfamiliar with my player's guides, this video will provide a brief overview of the structure and themes of the campaign while remaining light on spoilers. I'll provide a rundown of the setting and lore leading up to the campaign, then dig into some mechanical options players can select to have a thematic connection to the story, including ancestries, classes, and religious options. I'll also be adding a little GM advice at the end to address some of the background information a GM might want to consider when telling this story. Also, warning. The following video contains major spoilers for the Hell's Rebels adventure path from 1st edition. If you are playing, or are planning to play in that campaign, maybe skip this video and this AP altogether, at least until you wrap it up. Curtain Call, as it is written, requires the events of Hell's Rebels to have taken place. Before I go any further, I should also lay out my sources for this video. If you're planning to play in Curtain Call, you or your GM will need access to all 3 books in the AP, along with the official Player's Guide PDF. I also suggest the Lost Omens World Guide as a source for players to familiarize themselves with Kintargo and the region of Ravenel more broadly. If you have access to the 1st edition AP Hell's Rebels, it might make for a fun read to provide you with more context surrounding Kintargo's recent history, though I wouldn't consider it required reading by any stretch of the imagination. Additionally, this AP is structured such that it can be run as a sequel to a previous adventure path. I'll touch more on that a bit later in this video. Finally, GMs running this AP might want to consider a few specific Paizo publications for further context, but I'll detail those later in the GM section near the end of this video. With that out of the way, let's start with the campaign outline. Curtain Call is a 3-part adventure path which takes player characters from 11th level through 20th level. It is the 17th adventure path which Paizo has produced for 2nd edition, assuming you count the remake of Kingmaker, covering books 204, 205, and 206 in the Adventure Path product line. As usual, the official player's guide for this campaign has been published online for free by Paizo and is available at the link in the video description. This player's guide is definitely one of the best Paizo has ever produced, so I highly suggest you give it a read. Curtain Call focuses on the city of Kintargo in the Duchy of Ravenel, a nation which recently rebelled against infernal Cheliacs and became an independent nation. Players should expect to spend the majority of their time in Kintargo proper, navigating the social scene in what is commonly seen as the art capital of the Inner Sea region. PCs will also travel to Vyre, a city on an island north of Kintargo, known for its criminal underworld. PCs should also expect to make minor excursions to at least 2 other major locations in the Inner Sea region as part of this AP, but I won't detail that in full to avoid spoilers. I should also note that, as written, this AP kicks off in Osirian. Personally, though, I don't see that as an absolute. More on that in a bit. So, what exactly are we doing in this AP? Curtain Call focuses on a group of PCs who are already considered heroes. The PCs have earned a degree of fame and notoriety from their past exploits, during which they defeated a major villain. The stories of these adventures have caught the ear of a talented opera producer based out of Kintargo. This producer, who at first wishes to remain anonymous, has contacted the PCs and invited them to Kintargo, explaining that she wants to produce an opera based on the PCs' past adventures. The production of this opera then becomes the primary narrative goal for the majority of the campaign, and the PCs will need to face the various challenges and trials which stage production entails. These challenges range from casting actors, to settling backstage disputes, to securing funding, though in the magical world of Golarion, such activities take on a distinctly fantastical flair. Of course, being a Pathfinder AP, there's plenty of high-stakes shenanigans going on in the background, which the players must deal with in order to ensure a successful production of their opera. As the PCs deal with these challenges, they build up a pool of production points, a resource which will be used to track the eventual success or failure of their opera. Production points aren't used until Book 3 of the AP, but they are a critical resource, so players should feel a sense of accomplishment whenever they acquire them. Zooming out a bit, let's look at the themes running through this AP. As you might have guessed already, theatricality is the primary theme undergirding the entire story. This is a role-play-heavy campaign, and social interactions on both the personal and public scale often outshine combat and violence as a means of overcoming challenges. One extension of this theme of theatricality is the idea of personas, and how they can be adopted to influence the perceptions of others. In many ways, however, this theme of theatricality is completely literal. The PCs are literally the producers of a play, and their goal is to put on a show which debuts to rave reviews. Looking at the story more broadly, this campaign fully embraces the concepts of melodrama and camp. The phrase "over the top" doesn't even begin to describe this story. Again, the whole point of the A-plot is to put on a successful play. The PCs will need to deal with things like satisfying the demands of a diva, impressing financial backers to secure a playhouse, and resolving some Phantom of the Opera-style misadventures. At the same time, the campaign contrasts this with some very serious threats in the B-plot, ranging from insane religious cults to attempted kidnappings. I cannot emphasize enough that this story goes to some absolutely ridiculous places, narratively speaking. For this AP, the most successful players will be those who are willing to embrace the heightened emotionality of the story and accept the unique mixture of whimsy and high-stakes storytelling which the story employs. Colorful characters absolutely fill the pages of this AP, each complete with personal quirks, petty or even catty motivations, and boundless enthusiasm. Being able to respond without cynicism to these high-drama NPCs will be key to enjoying this story. So, with all that in mind, where exactly do we start off in Curtain Call? The AP begins with a prologue chapter, intended to serve as a bridge between the PC's previous exploits and the events of the Curtain Call AP. The PCs have been made aware of the return of one of their previous rivals, the primary villain of their last adventure, which Curtain Call refers to as their nemesis. The nemesis has, apparently, returned from death and is wreaking havoc in Osirian. The PCs have followed up on this information, and the AP begins with them invading the Nemesis's hideout to defeat them once and for all. Now, I say Osirian, but realistically, the location for this chapter is pretty setting agnostic. These encounters could be picked up and dropped into another location on Golarion with relative ease, so work with your GM to figure out what works best for your group. The way I like to think about this prologue is similar to the opening scene in Avengers: Age of Ultron. The PCs have been adventuring a bit since the end of their last major quest and are now tying up loose ends. This opening chapter should serve as a chance for the PCs to show off their skills, establish or re-establish the social dynamics of the team, and display any personal growth they've undergone. For groups playing this AP as a sequel to a previous AP, this opening chapter can be a good chance to reminisce. For groups running this AP on its own, however, Paizo has some excellent suggestions for how to establish your group's past. I'll get to that in a bit. Once they've dealt with the immediate challenge their returned nemesis presents, the prologue ends with a minor time skip, after which the PCs will be contacted by the opera producer via letter. She will invite them to Kintargo, and, once the PCs agree to meet with her, they make their way to the Silver City to begin the campaign proper. Getting back to a high-level analysis, what kinds of challenges should players in Curtain Call expect to face? Like I said earlier, this AP places a lot of emphasis on roleplay and social interactions. These might manifest as single short social encounters, which can be resolved with a single skill check. but, more frequently, appear as extended multi-stage challenges, which require multiple successful checks to overcome. I highly suggest sitting down with your group to work out the preferred approach to these types of challenges. The AP provides mechanical resolutions for most, if not all of them, but some groups might dislike the idea of relying on random dice rolls to resolve what is essentially a narrative challenge. Some groups might prefer to resolve these challenges using roleplay only, letting a player's own acting and improv skills determine whether they succeed or fail. Of course, most tables will likely take a balanced approach, using dice rolls to differentiate between player and character, but allowing good roleplay to raise or lower the check DCs, or occasionally bypass checks entirely. In addition to social challenges, the AP makes use of the victory point systems throughout its run to mechanically represent extended challenges, which have a wide range of success criteria. Players and GMs should familiarize themselves with these rules. When it comes to combat, this AP does feature a few small dungeon crawls, so PCs should be at least proficient in combat, and players should still invest in the basic skills and equipment necessary to survive in a combat-focused environment. Several of the toughest fights in this AP can be made much easier by using skills or exploring the environment, so keep your eyes open. Finally, I should mention that horror elements crop up with a degree of regularity throughout the campaign. These elements might be hard on players who aren't into serial killer-themed narratives, or who suffer from arachnophobia. Getting a bit more specific, players could improve their chances at success in this AP by ensuring they build characters who invest in the following skills. Unsurprisingly, the social skills all stand out in this AP. Perform is the most important of them all, but deception, diplomacy, and intimidate will all get plenty of use throughout the entirety of the campaign. Of the lore skills, theater lore and Kintargo lore will be the most important, with art lore and Vyre lore following close behind. A few other lore skills, ranging from games lore to fortune-telling to scouting, will also have moments to shine, though they will crop up much less frequently. For a full list of relevant lore skills, check out the official player's guide. Society stands out among the non-lore knowledge skills for the entirety of the story, with religion becoming equally important in books 2 and 3. Finally, crafting can be especially impactful in this AP, both in its ability to contribute to the plot and in the substantial amount of downtime available to the PCs. Beyond these recommendations, all other skills will come up eventually in Curtain Call, though nature and survival will have the least relevance to the plot. Setting the tone. Before I continue, I want to acknowledge that this campaign features a tone which might be difficult for some players and GMs to grasp at first. A story about putting on an opera is kind of an odd narrative for a tabletop RPG. I've heard some reviewers online claim that this AP is definitely intended for former theater kids, and I totally get that. That said, this is, by far, the most fun I've ever had reading a Pathfinder campaign, and I have never been involved in the theater in any way. I think a lot of players and GMs can get into this story. It's just a matter of setting the right tonal and mechanical expectations. I've already mentioned that this AP highlights role-playing over combat, to the point that probably 3/4 of the AP can be finished without rolling initiative. But I also want to make sure that you and your tablemates are also in the right headspace narratively. To that end, I have a few suggestions for films your group could watch to help establish a shared set of expectations. These might be a great idea for a session -1, so to speak, a pre-session 0 movie night for your group. Up first is the film Babylon from 2024, and in specific, the second major vignette in the film. This section of the movie is a backstage look into the high-stakes world of silent film production in the 1920s, and it features an excellent stylized depiction of the insanity which goes into theatrical productions and the type of work the PCs might need to engage in to make their production a success. Again, only the second vignette strikes the right tone, and I don't suggest the whole of the Babylon film as a good source of inspiration. The frenetic and over-the-top nature of the work performed in the film might be hilarious to an outside observer, but pay attention to how seriously the characters take these situations. They don't see their lives as absurd. To them, these activities are the day-to-day challenges of life in the entertainment business. On the more explicitly comedic side of things, the 1967 film The Producers takes that backstage drama and dials up the absurdity. The fraudulent antics of Bialystok and Bloom might not give a lot of insight into the inner workings of a well-managed stage production, but they are certainly good for a laugh, assuming you appreciate the comedic style of Mel Brooks. I'll admit, some of the humor hasn't aged especially well, but the stuff that works still works great, and Gene Wilder is a treat to watch as always. Bonus points if you incorporate LSD and his absolutely ridiculous boots into your campaign as an NPC. Cranking the melodrama up to 11, Moulin Rouge is a fantastic, high-energy romantic musical dripping in style and tone, which tells the story of a songwriter who falls in love with a stage performer. The cartoonish editing dials up the whimsy without detracting from the film's darker moments of abuse, deception, and jealousy. Beyond that, the backstage drama and intense sincerity and emotionality of the characters could help players and GMs get a feel for how they might incorporate over-the-top elements into their story without it devolving into an outright comedy. Also, the Like a Virgin and Roxanne sequences are phenomenal, and everyone should watch them. Finally, as a companion piece to all of these, I also suggest watching the 2004 film adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera. Specifically, I suggest taking a little inspiration from Caden Kalian and using the viewing experience to partake in a drinking game. The film is not good, not by any stretch of the imagination. Gerard Butler's singing is a terrible fit for the music style, the editing is broken beyond repair, and Minnie Driver does not get nearly enough screen time. But laughing at the melodrama and ridiculousness of it, while slightly inebriated, is a great time, and the bones of a good and interesting story are there, even if they were fleshed out in the worst way possible. I've posted my own rules for the Phantom drinking game in the comments. Fair warning though, do not play this game using hard liquor. Your previous adventures. The Curtain Call adventure path requires your characters to have performed some great deeds in their past, and these deeds will serve as the inspiration for the opera they are producing. To that end, this AP can serve as a sequel to many other APs which Paizo has produced. Parties who completed a previous adventure path will have built-in answers to the questions of who their nemesis is and what specific events their opera should depict. Abomination Vaults, Quest for the Frozen Flame, Outlaws of Alkenstar, Sky King's Tomb, and Gatewalkers all run from levels 1 to 10, and could make for some very fun stage productions. As a side note, now I'm picturing an opera based on Outlaws of Alkenstar, which is just an in-universe steampunk mix of Newsies and Oklahoma, and frankly that sounds hilarious. Outside of these APs, however, I could also see Triumph of the Tusk working out, even though it goes past level 10. Even Season of Ghosts could work, and that might allow your characters to create an opera which serves as a sort of cultural exchange, introducing inner-sea theatergoers to the Eastern-inspired performance mediums of Tian Sha. These might take the form of kabuki theater from Japan, or Dishi masked opera from China. Of course, if you and your group have been running a homebrew campaign for a while, and want to use that to tie into Curtain Call, that will work just fine. All you really need to do is identify your nemesis, the big bad of your campaign who has had the most significant impact on your PCs. All that being said, what if you haven't played a campaign leading into Curtain Call? What if you have played a previous campaign, but would rather start fresh with new characters rather than keep going with your old PCs? Can the campaign still work without being run as a direct sequel to another adventure or adventure path? In short, yes. Curtain Call can work just fine without having to run a previous AP with these PCs. And, in truth, there are some advantages to building brand new characters for this AP, since you can incorporate personality traits and PC mechanics which specifically resonate with the themes of the story. That said, you will need to do a little extra work to get things to run smoothly. Paizo has helpfully put together a questionnaire for parties approaching this campaign. 10 questions appear near the end of the official player's guide, alongside explanations of what each question is trying to get at. Answering these questions will help the players and GM flesh out and agree on the extent of their previous adventures. These questions are: 1. How did you, the PCs, meet? 2. Where was your first adventure, and what specifically was memorable about it? 3. How did this first adventure set you on your path? This question is asking what twist in that first adventure led to the larger challenge that the PCs faced. 4. Who was your nemesis, the being who represents the ultimate villain your group needed to defeat at the culmination of their trials? 5. What was your nemesis's larger plan? 6. What minions did your nemesis employ? This question is asking for a broad description of the most iconic servants of your nemesis. Appropriate answers might include devils, shapeshifters, cultists, fey creatures, undead, or elementals, among other such broad categorizations. 7. What treasures did your group discover? This question is asking for one specific object or piece of information or knowledge which the PCs obtained, which was either controlled by the nemesis or was critical to the defeat of the nemesis. 8. Where did you defeat your nemesis? 9. What was the fate of your nemesis? Were they killed? Were they imprisoned? How were they nullified as a threat? 10. What were your heroic deeds? To answer this question, each player should think of one specific heroic deed their character performed, which contributed to the success of the adventure, but which did not occur during the final confrontation with the nemesis. These deeds might be a specific action in an important combat encounter, the performance of a magical ritual, or the discovery of some long-lost knowledge. 11. How do you think of your group? Comedic, dramatic, or spectacular? This question is asking the group to place their previous adventuring careers into one of 3 categories, representing the broad style of opera which they are aiming to produce. Comedic adventures are likely smaller in scope, with a general air of positivity, romance, and humor, and are likely limited in terms of unique locations. Nemeses in a comedic adventure might be better categorized as mischievous, rather than outright evil. Dramatic adventures, meanwhile, involve darker or more disturbing themes, including elements of horror or tragedy. These adventures might involve more complicated character motivations, and villains who are truly evil and sadistic. Finally, spectacular adventures are those which are epic in scale, featuring large casts of characters and travel to a variety of exciting locations. These adventures likely feature large set-piece battles as the final confrontation. You'll notice, however, that a lot of the level 1 to 10 APs I mentioned earlier don't fit neatly into one of these 3 categories. So, this question is definitely intended to paint your exploits with a broad brush. So, these are the 11 questions Paizo presents. I think they will do a pretty good job of setting up a party's previous exploits. I strongly encourage you to read through these questions in the player's guide, as they provide a little more clarifying detail. These questions could be easily answered as part of a Session 0 with your group, and present a great opportunity for PCs and the GM to collaborate on some fun and interesting backstories to feature during the production of the Curtain Call opera. Before I close out this section, I want to throw out an unconventional idea. Curtain Call assumes your PCs completed the adventure which inspires their opera within about the past year. Really, though, there isn't much that depends on that. If I were playing this, I might consider playing a group of PCs who adventured in their youth, 20 or more years ago. After that, they retired. News of their risen nemesis drew them out of retirement and brought them together again for one last job. Then, with tales of their great deeds having become popular again upon their return to adventuring, the anonymous opera producer seeks them out to finally tell their story to the world. With this setup, players have the opportunity to play an experienced adventuring party, but one where the PCs may have drifted apart over time, giving them an opportunity to get to know each other all over again. This could also allow for the incorporation of story elements which don't often come up in Pathfinder campaigns, things like rekindled friendships, questions of legacy, and burying old hatchets. The History of Kintargo. The known history of Kintargo begins in 3213 AR, with the official naming of the first Lord Mayor, Charletra Andos, the Red General of the Empire of Taldor. Of course, the town had existed prior to the general's arrival, but this marked the first time it had risen to prominence in Taldan imperial records. The town remained a small fishing village for a few years after the Lord Mayor's appointment, but this would not remain the case for long. Perfectly positioned to take advantage of the north-south shipping lanes, which were quickly exploding as Taldor began to explore Varissia, Kintargo quickly grew into a major trading port. With the rebellion of Cheliax against the Taldan Empire, Kintargo became largely independent, though this was a temporary situation. In 4606 AR, the death of Erodin ushered in the ascension of House Thrun as the ruling dynasty in Cheliax. Backed up by the legions of Hell, Abigail I sought to conquer Kintargo to solidify her power base. Her efforts were opposed by a group of now legendary folk heroes called the Silver Ravens. These 5 warriors, the elven swashbuckler Jackdaw, the Ayuvaran cleric of Milani, Amy Reed, the human bard Kida, the human ranger Brakizi, and the halfling wizard Ba Brackenthorn, resisted 4 separate invasions by the agents of Cheliax and Nidal. In addition to their own daring acts of heroism and might, they employed a powerful magical ritual called the Song of Silver, a musical performance which infused the whole of Kintargo with powerful magic to prevent incoming teleportations by fiends, and empowered the weapons of the citizens against devils. Of course, all good things come to an end, and during Cheliax's 5th invasion in 4640 AR, the Silver Ravens were defeated, and Kintargo became a holding of infernal Cheliax. Even in defeat, however, the people of Kintargo proved unwilling to give up their independent streak. Now part of the Archduchy of Ravenel, Kintargo never really fit the mold of an obedient Chelish city. Separated from the imperial capital, and with plenty of access to ocean-going trade, Kintargo maintained cultural connections to all manner of nations throughout the Inner Sea region. This meant that Cheliax had no method of imposing strict cultural control upon the city. This lack of control was further ingrained with the city's position as the home base for the Hell Knight Order of the Torrent. That might sound strange, but the Order of the Torrent is one of the vanishingly few non-evil orders of Hell Knights, and its focus is on the rescuing of victims of kidnapping. The Order of the Torrent held no loyalty to Cheliax or to House Thrun. Of course, the city leadership still needed to play along with Cheliax's nominal control of the region. The Church of Asmodeus was, naturally, the largest and most prominent religion in the city. That said, the churches of Abadar and Shellen were also very prominent, as were the faiths of Iomide, Irori, and Zon-Kuthan. There was a grand tradition in Kintargo of obeying Chelish regulations, so long as Chelish authorities were present, then quickly relaxing those laws as soon as the authorities in question moved along. This, of course, led to Kintargo becoming a hotbed of anti-Thrun sentiment, as rebels and rabble-rousers from all over the Empire realized they were safer in Kintargo than anywhere else. This included followers of Caden Kalian and Milani, as well as agents of the abolitionist Bellflower Network. This all came crashing down in 4715 AR, with the appointment of Paracount Barzillai Thrun to the position of Lord Mayor by the Chelaxian government. In response to the Glorious Reclamation, an attempted rebellion in southern Cheliax, Barzillai immediately instilled martial law in Kintargo, bringing the infamous Order of the Rack Hell Knights to replace the Order of the Torrent. The Order of the Rack specialized in the crushing of dissent and rebellions, and they aided Barzillai as he tightened his iron grip on the city. As dissent in the city grew, Barzillai and his followers took action. In an event which would become known as the Night of Ashes, the Hell Knights and the City Watch suddenly attacked multiple dissident groups. Multiple secret organizations, including the Milanite group the Rose of Kintargo, the Iroran Sacred Order of Archivists, and a newly formed successor group of Silver Ravens, were raided, and their members captured. Public executions followed. In the wake of the Night of Ashes, all religions which advocated for freedom, including those of Caden Kalian, Milani, Desna, Serenray, and Calistria, were banned, and even followers of Shelyn were required to register with the government. Barzillai, however, had miscalculated. In his attempts to dominate the citizens of Kintargo, he had merely given them the push they needed to embrace open rebellion. The Silver Ravens, the new order of rebel defenders, reorganized after the Night of Ashes, and led the city in rebellion under the careful direction of the Silver Council. A significant turning point in the war came when the Silver Ravens destroyed the garrison at Menador Keep, allowing them to collapse the Menador Gap, the only overland route which Cheliax could use to move troops through the Menador Mountains to Kintargo. This left Barzillai and his forces isolated from Imperial reinforcement. Barzillai soon retaliated, however. He lured the Silver Ravens into a trap at the Ruby Masquerade, a celebration taking place in the famous Kintargo Opera House. Though the Silver Ravens escaped the trap, and even managed to rescue the famous Silver Raven leader and opera star Shensen, the event is still remembered as a tragic victory. The loss of innocent life due to Barzillai's actions is still mourned in Kintargo to this day, even as most people see this as the final turning point in the War for Independence. The fallout from the Ruby Massacre, as it was eventually called, resulted in the death of Barzillai Thrune, after all. But Kintargo's fate was not yet sealed. The Silver Ravens had little time before House Thrune was able to deal with the glorious reclamation, and turn their full attention to reconquering Kintargo. In this moment of desperation, however, hope arrived in the form of a little-known infernal artifact called the Kintargo Contract. This document, written by Abigail I during her negotiations with Asmodeus, provided an obscure legal loophole by which the Silver Ravens could secure Kintargo's and all of Ravenel's freedom from Cheliax. While this technicality might seem odd to those unfamiliar with Chelaxian culture, legal codes and technical details are what bind all of Infernal Cheliax's society together. Once the Silver Ravens secured the Kintargo contract, the Devils of Hell were literally unable to act against Kintargo's independence movement. House Thrune had no choice but to come to the negotiating table, eventually resulting in independence for the new Duchy of Ravenel. In 4717 AR, Lord Mayor Gilia Binalus was selected as the leader of all of Ravenel, a position called the Domina. She formalized relations with the nation of Vidrian, another nation which was formed from a successful rebellion against Cheliax. This relationship led to the founding of the now famous Firebrands, who fight for freedom with unparalleled style all throughout the Inner Sea region. KintargoToday. Kintargo is called the Silver City, a name which many attribute to the unique silver veins which run through much of the stone which makes up the city's buildings. Kintargo is a wealthy city, benefiting from its position at the terminus of the Yolubilis River. In addition to serving as a way station for ships traveling from the Inner Sea to Varissia and beyond, Kintargo also serves as the primary site of export for Ravenel's main export goods: salt, silver, and seafood, especially salmon. With a population of 15,000, Kintargo is comparable to the nearby regional capitals of Korvosa and Magnamar, but benefits from being closer to the beating heart of the Inner Sea region than either of these two cities. For that reason, the city is surprisingly cosmopolitan, offering everything from fine dining and entertainment to a wide variety of magical and mundane items available for purchase in the city's many markets. Of course, the economic sector for which Kintargo is most well known is the art industry. Art is the lifeblood of Kintargo, and the faith of Shellen is the most prominent religion in the city. Kintargan theatrical productions, and especially operas, regularly draw international attention from as far away as Absalom and beyond, and Kintargo is seen by many as one of the artistic capitals of all of Avestan. As such, the art scene in Kintargo is no laughing matter. Look at the city's stat block. Rival artists are literally listed as the first major danger in the city. Due to the importance of art, and especially stage production, to the city's economy, entire industries have sprung up within the city which support artistic creation. Costume makers, dye makers, set constructors, prop makers, show promoters, makeup artists, voice coaches, production assistants, choreographers, dance instructors, the list goes on. All these folks and many more can be found with relative ease in Kintargo, making it the ideal place to put on a brand new opera. Kintargo is governed by the Silver Council, in conjunction with Lord Mayor Binalus. The Silver Council consists of representatives from the prominent noble families of Kintargo, as well as wealthy and influential citizens who've worked their way into positions of prominence. The Silver Council operates out of the People's Temple, the former temple of Asmodeus, which has been converted into a secular government center. Speaking of religion, the faiths of Calistria, Cadencalion, Irori, Milani, Serenre, Shellen, and Zon-Kuthon are all openly worshipped in Kintargo. While Zon-Kuthon might seem the odd one out among that group, his presence is in large part due to the close proximity of Nidal to Ravenel. All these churches maintain a degree of political power in Kintargo, but Shellen's will be the most relevant to this campaign. Now, I could go into more detail here, but I think this is a natural place to stop. Odds are your PCs have never been to Kintargo before this campaign, so this is about what they would know as newcomers to the city. The official Curtain Call Player's Guide provides a surprisingly detailed look at the city, which I encourage you to reference as your characters become increasingly familiar with it. Exploring Kintargo's unique culture and colorful population of NPCs is part of this campaign's charm, so I fully encourage you to spend the occasional session getting lost in the city's numerous back alleys and vibrant markets, assuming your GM is prepared for that, of course. A brief mention of Vyre. Northwest of Kintargo lies Vyre, the mysterious city of masks. Like Kintargo, Vyre has long had an independent streak. Though it was technically part of the Chilaxian Empire for centuries, it was always more appropriately thought of as an independent city-state. Cheliax rarely enforced any form of order in Vyre, instead deferring to the local government to ensure things in the city never got out of hand. With the founding of Ravenel, however, this de facto independence was finally formalized. The leaders of Vyre seceded from Cheliax and agreed to become a territory of Ravenel, under the condition that Domina Binalus and her successors never attempt to impose outside laws upon the city. Despite this independence, Vyre and Kintargo remain closely connected economically. Ferries travel between the cities daily, and trade between the cities, both over and under the table, is a regular occurrence. Vyre is an old city, far older than Kintargo. It was founded in 1673 AR by free-spirited Taldans seeking a less regulated life. This spirit remains with the city to this day, and laws in Vyre are lax to say the least. The city remains a holdout for runaways, smugglers, fugitives, and all peoples seeking to avoid attention. Trade is conducted with no concern for tariffs, taxes, or restrictions, and few, if any, goods are deemed inappropriate for sale, assuming someone is willing to buy. A total of 5 laws govern life in Vyre. These rules, called the 5 Promises, are posted throughout the city, and are generally upheld by all citizens without question. Breaking one of the 5 promises might not result in arrest, but it will certainly result in punishment, even if that punishment doesn't present itself clearly or immediately. The first promise is, "I shall honor all coin," which indicates that all prices can be negotiated, but sales are considered final and binding. The second promise, "I shall speak many names," commands the peoples of Vyre to accept whatever name a stranger gives them, even if they believe it to be false. Privacy and secrets are considered a personal right in Vyre. "I may wound, yet shall not kill" is the third promise, and instructs the citizenry to leave their enemies alive, so they might pursue vengeance if they choose. This forces people to think twice before engaging in violence, if for no other reason than to make sure that they have very carefully obscured their identity. The fourth promise, "I know none are below me," establishes Vyre's most virtuous cultural trait. Discrimination and prejudice are deeply frowned upon throughout the city. Finally, "I shall let closed doors remain closed" is the promise which states that a person's secrets are theirs to keep, and that dirty laundry is best kept hidden away except in extreme circumstances. Of course, the 5 promises would mean little for the city without an enforcement mechanism of some kind, and this is where the city government, such as it is, steps in. Vyre is ruled by 5 so-called monarchs, the kings and queens of Vyre. The positions of king and queen are semi-official, and each one grants the authority to enforce order and inflict punishment as the monarch sees fit, at least within that monarch's traditional area of influence. Each monarch also takes command of one of the 5 masks of Vyre, the name for the branches of the city watch. I've made this little table to help sort out the areas of concern which pertain to each monarch. Notably, the 5 monarchs are not elected. When one monarch is deposed, for one reason or another, their position is vacant until some power player in the city collects the social, political, and financial capital necessary to seize and hold the title. It is up to a monarch to defend their title from all other claimants. Ancestries for player characters. Now it's time to dig into some player-facing information which you can use to build your characters for Curtain Call. Kicking things off, PCs can select from an incredibly wide variety of ancestries for their characters in this AP. Kintargo is a large city where many ancestries are accepted without the blink of an eye, though ancestries which are exceptionally rare in the region, like automatons or androids, might still draw attention and recognition. The city of Kintargo is mostly populated by humans, with a minority of halflings present as well. The city also plays host to a large number of Hellspawn Nephilim. These Nephilim were the target of substantial discrimination under Chelish rule, so the peoples of Kintargo and Ravenel more broadly have made an effort to embrace and support those whose bloodline has been influenced by diabolic forces. Outside of Kintargo proper, elves, gnomes, dwarves, and leshies are all fairly common in Ravenel. Ayuvarans and Dromar are less common, as are goblins and orcs, but none of these ancestries or heritages would stand out as worthy of notice in Kintargo. Again, though, you could play members of most ancestries without any significant problems in this AP. It might even be fun to deliberately play characters who hail from faraway lands, like the Mwangi Expanse, the Impossible Lands, Tian Sha, or Northern Avestan. Especially if the PC's previous adventuring was in these far-off locales, the novelty of having non-native ancestries present in Kintargo might even help drum up interest in the opera the PCs are attempting to produce. There are, however, some ancestries which are poor choices for this campaign. Aquatic ancestries, like the Azarketi or the merfolk, will struggle in this AP, as very few encounters or challenges will present opportunities for their water-based skills to be relevant. They might not face specific challenges, but they also won't have many chances for their natural talents to shine. On the other side of things, undead characters might face substantial discrimination in Kintargo. The people of Ravenel generally dislike the undead and see them as monsters to be either pitied or feared. That being said, I could see a particularly sociable skeleton or ghost making quite the splash in the Kintargan social scene, so talk to your GM if these character options appeal to you. Finally, I want to highlight an excellent third-party option which I found on Pathfinder Infinite. The Song of the Stheno supplement introduces the Stheno playable ancestry, a people descended from a Medusa who rebelled against the monstrous goddess Lamashtu and sought redemption through the aid of Shellen, goddess of art and love. Though the Medusa called Stheno was killed, the snakes from her head survived and were raised to sapience and transformed into humanoids through Shellen's direct intervention. The Stheno ancestry, which took up the name of their mother Medusa, bears a connection to art and song as a result of Shellen's influence, and could be a great fit for this AP as a result. If you're interested in this idea, check out the Song of the Stheno supplement on Pathfinder Infinite. I think it's pretty great. Classes for player characters. When looking at classes for PCs in this AP, it's important to remember that this campaign focuses on roleplay first and combat second. While PCs will need to take a punch and dish out damage during this AP, it's far more important to have a character who can consistently engage with skill-based challenges outside of combat. With that in mind, let's begin by looking at the traditionally combat-focused marshals. The Swashbuckler is the best option here, as their panache class features tie nicely to the campaign's theme of theatricality. The Battle Dancer, Wit, and Braggart styles will fit this AP best, but other styles could work just fine as well. After the Swashbuckler, my next class suggestion is the Outwit Ranger. The skill bonuses provided by the Outwit Edge will excel in this campaign, though I caution against using an animal companion in this story. A Vindicator Ranger might work as well, depending on your choice of deity. After that, the Champion is probably my final class suggestion. For the Champion, the newly released Grandeur cause is easily the most thematic, though I could also see the Liberation cause fitting in nicely in Kintargo. Moving on to the skill-focused marshals, the Rogue is the obvious best choice. Rogues will benefit from a wide variety of skills, making them well-suited to the variety of challenges this campaign presents. The Scoundrel and Mastermind rackets will likely be the most effective here, though the Avenger might also work if you pick a thematic deity. Unsurprisingly, the Investigator is also an excellent choice in this campaign, as a surprising number of challenges will suit their particular talents. The interrogation methodology actually isn't bad in this AP, but I would still probably lean toward empiricism to avoid being too reliant on charisma in addition to intelligence. That said, the new Palatine Detective class archetype could also be fun. The Thaumaturge is my last pick here, as their natural charisma will lend itself well to this campaign. The Regalia implement will be tremendously successful here, as will the Tome, but the Lantern could also stand out in a few key moments. Moving over to the spellcasters, it should come as no surprise that the Bard is the single best thematic choice of all the classes for Curtain Call. Performance is the best skill in this campaign, and no class does performance quite like the Bard. The Maestro and Polymath muses are probably the best options for this campaign, while Warrior and Zoophonia are probably the worst. After the Bard, a lot of spellcasters could be successful here. The Lore Mystery Oracle could perform well, as could the Fae, Nymph, or Imperial Bloodline Sorcerer. The emphasis on charisma will serve these classes well. For the intelligence casters, the Choir Politic Patron for the Witch is a solid thematic and mechanical choice. Lastly, the Cloistered Cleric is a great option for this campaign, assuming, of course, you select a thematic deity. More on them in a minute. Lastly, a few archetypes really stand out for all characters in Curtain Call. This AP introduces several new feats relating to stage performance. These feats generally belong to the first 4 archetypes I've listed here, but I could also see some GMs allowing them to apply to other archetypes on a case-by-case basis. The acrobat will feel right at home in the backstage activities the PCs will need to engage in, and will help characters from any class feel like they have some stage experience. The gladiator, meanwhile, will allow even the most combat-focused characters to feel at home performing in front of a crowd. The dandy archetype could give any character an edge in the many social challenges which feature in this campaign, and the celebrity archetype is probably the most thematic archetype for the entire AP. In addition to these main 4 archetypes, I also suggest looking at the Captivator. Though you might need to make some adjustments due to the remaster, the Captivator's emphasis on mentalism and illusions is a great fit for this story. Additionally, the Spelldancer archetype from the third-party Impossible Lands Plus supplement on Pathfinder Infinite can add some theatrical flavor to any spellcaster. If I was running this AP with the limited free archetype variant, I would allow all characters to select from these 6 archetypes, as well as the Bard multiclass archetype. Religious options for player characters. This campaign is an excellent opportunity for religious characters to express their faith through roleplay, and a number of deities stand out as great choices to consider. Shelyn is far and away the single best choice of deity for characters in the Curtain Call adventure path. Her generally non-violent attitude is well suited to a campaign based more on roleplay, and her emphasis on art ties into the theme of theatricality, as well as the overall goal to produce an opera for the stage. On top of that, the Church of Shelyn is a prominent fixture in Kintargo, and at least one Shelynite priest will feature in the story. Beyond Shelyn, a number of deities focused on art and artistic creation could fit nicely into this story. Nocticula is the recently ascended goddess of art, redemption, and the night. As a former demon lord, her faith plays host to those seeking to walk away from their past misdeeds and start a new life as creatives. Her interest in art focuses on being true to one's self and using art to express deep personal connections. Findaladlara is the elven goddess of art, architecture, and craft, and, though her faith is small outside of the elves, she holds an appeal to artists everywhere. Her interest in art focuses on skill and discipline, emphasizing the perfection of a craft through hard work and careful study, rather than free-spirited experimentation. Arshay is the non-binary imperial lord of self-expression and liberation. Their interest in art lies primarily in the use of artistic expression to explore one's true self and develop an understanding of one's needs and desires. They are also passionate about throwing off tyranny and oppression. Though a minor deity, Arshay's faith is prominent in Kintargo. For those interested in Arshay, I've got a video on them penciled in for June to celebrate Pride Month. Bolka is the dwarven goddess of marriage, passion, and commitment, though she is also sometimes interpreted as a goddess of beauty among the dwarves. She is generally seen as peaceful, loving, and devoted, though she has a boundless enthusiasm for romantic relationships. Dwarven artists tend to revere her with the same hard-working ethos that their people have become known for. These 5 deities, Shelyn, Nocticula, Findaladlara, Arshay, and Bolka, are also the members of a newly detailed pantheon, confusingly called the Curtain Call. I've presented the basic statistics for the Curtain Call pantheon here. The pantheon's edicts are to help to create public works of art, to encourage creativity in others, to fight against propaganda and weaponized art meant to spread harm, and to support fellow creatives as you would your own family. Conversely, to censor or destroy legitimate works of art, to leave those who depend on you to fend for themselves at the last minute, or to use phrases like good luck that might tempt the fickle forces of fate to ensure the opposite comes to pass, are all anathema to the Curtain Call pantheon. The pantheon has the divine font of Heal, and clerics and champions likely have access to holy sanctification, even though sanctification rules weren't published at the time of this AP's publication. The domains of the Curtain Call pantheon are creation, family, indulgence, and passion, and it also has the alternate domain of change. Its favored weapon is the sword cane. Beyond the members of the Curtain Call pantheon, a few other deities might also fit this campaign. While less overtly focused on art, Calistria, the goddess of lust, trickery, and vengeance, is often worshipped in the theater world. Her emphasis on intrigue and mischief appeals to those employed in the often cutthroat industry of stage production, though her emphasis on lust is appreciated as well. Caden Calian, meanwhile, is celebrated by all of Kintargo for his emphasis on freedom and the overthrow of tyrants. His free-spirited nature is beloved by theatergoers and theatrical professionals alike, and his faith played a significant role in Kintargo's successful revolution against Cheliax. Desna, goddess of luck and travel, also encourages artistic pursuits in her followers, and has a deep love for both art in general and Shelyn in specific. Followers of Desna who engage with the performing arts might be members of traveling performance troupes. Desna is also on good terms with most of the deities I've already mentioned. Though a lesser goddess in the grand scheme of things, Ashava, goddess of dance and bogs, is another solid choice, especially if you want your opera to feature dance as a major element. Ashava is most popular in nearby Magnamar, but her faith is commonly held by dancers the world over. Finally, Milani, goddess of resistance and revolution, is well liked in Kintargo. Her church played a significant role in the rebellion, and her followers are well liked by the general populace. Though considered a minor goddess in much of the world, Milani is deeply respected in Kintargo. Lastly, before I close out this section, I need to make a few cautionary warnings. There are several deities which players should absolutely avoid choosing as patrons for their characters. Without going into spoilers, PCs who follow these deities will face some serious thematic and narrative challenges throughout the events of the story. The main three deities this warning applies to are Gorum, god of battle, Achekik, god of assassins, and Norgorber, god of criminality. Though I would probably throw Thamir Gix, halfling god of murder, into that list as well. If you really want to play a follower of these deities, you need to have a serious conversation with your GM. Campaign traits and backgrounds. Alright, closing things out for character creation, let's look at the backgrounds available for PCs in this adventure. Unlike a lot of APs, players actually have two choices to make when considering their background. The first is their choice of persona trait. A persona trait is a new feature in the Curtain Call AP. This trait represents how the public generally perceives your character. The PCs of Curtain Call will be treated with a degree of celebrity in Kintargo, especially as the premiere date for their opera draws near. Legends of the characters' past exploits, as well as rumors of their opera's production, will cause the local rumor mill to churn out gossip about the party, and a character's chosen persona trait informs the basis for that gossip. In short, the persona trait is a one-word description for how the public of Kintargo sees your character, through the lens of character archetypes seen in plays and operas. There are 8 traits to choose from. Flirts are seen as having strong social skills. Positive associations with flirts might include being seen as romantic or smooth, while negative associations might include being seen as shallow or overly reliant on charm. Guardians are seen as protectors and defenders. They are commonly regarded as reliable or kind, but might also be seen as too gentle or soft-spoken to be a heroic protagonist. Leaders are, unsurprisingly, seen to have a strong sense of initiative and a go-getter attitude. Some audience members, however, might interpret a leader as being cocky or self-important. Scholars are seen as the clever one in the group, and are always expected to solve problems. This often comes, however, with the expectation that the character is physically weak, and might feel superior to their less intellectual companions. Scoundrels are the classic Han Solo-style bad boy of the team. While these characters hold an appeal to most audience members, some see them as untrustworthy, or potentially dangerous to their friends. The underdog is seen as the outsider in the group, someone who may be in over their head, and might not belong in a group of heroes. That said, underdogs are often also celebrated for finding success in spite of adversity. Warriors are seen as the muscle in the party, the strong, reliable force which can take down enemies with ease. Warriors are sometimes seen as one-trick ponies, however, and might be interpreted as vicious or brutish. Finally, wildcards are characters who bring whimsy and creativity to the group, often thinking outside the box. They are also seen by some as unserious, or as potentially unreliable when the chips are down. When choosing your persona trait, consider how stories of your party's antics might twist and warp over time, and how perceptions of your character might differ from how they act in reality. It might be fun to choose a persona trait which clashes with your character's actual behavior, especially if the opera is expected to either lean into that incorrect perception or set the record straight about their true personality. After the matter of the persona traits is decided, players then have 8 campaign traits to choose from. The always chosen last background represents characters who are often overlooked by society. These characters have a desire to succeed, despite the low expectations placed upon them, and have studied various contests and competitions as well as social interaction to get a leg up. In addition to being trained in games lore and society, you gain the streetwise skill feat. The amateur director background represents characters who thrive on coordinating the work of others to advance shared goals. You likely had some connection to the theater world in your past, and that interest has caused you to study the field of theatrical production. In addition to being trained in theater lore and diplomacy, you gain the group impression skill feat. The art tutor background represents characters who have had substantial exposure to art in their youth, and who developed an appreciation for it. You've taken it upon yourself to share this appreciation with others, especially those who've had no chance to experience art with regularity in their own lives. In addition to being trained in crafting and art lore, you gain the Crafter's Appraisal skill feat. The bully or baiter background represents characters who understand what it means to be a bully, either because they were bullies themselves or because they punished bullies to protect others. You appreciate both violence and the threat of violence as useful tools in advancing your own ends. In addition to being trained in intimidation and underworld lore, you gain the Intimidating Glare skill feat. The supportive sponsor background represents characters who build up a sense of satisfaction from helping those in need. You tend to serve others out of the goodness of your heart, and are more than willing to put in the work needed to learn how to help the sick and injured. In addition to being trained in medicine and herbalism lore, you gain the Battle Medicine skill feat. The Town Troublemaker background represents characters who, earned or not, developed a reputation as troublemakers in their hometown. This doesn't mean you were evil, necessarily, since a troublemaker in Cheliax might be a follower of Iomide or Caden Kalian. Regardless, your rep gave you an insight into the shadowy parts of society. In addition to being trained in thievery and underworld lore, you gain the Dirty Trick skill feat. The Sideshow Scion background represents characters with a connection to public performance, most likely the circus or something similar. You either grew up as a performer or grew up dreaming to become a performer. Either way, you practiced the art of gamesmanship and performative movement regularly. In addition to being trained in acrobatics and games lore, you gain the Acrobatic Performance skill feat. Finally, the Wandering Libertine background represents itinerant characters who never settle down. Despite this roaming lifestyle, you always manage to woo a new romantic interest, though you inevitably end up leaving them behind when you depart. Still, your way with words ensures you won't be alone for long. In addition to being trained in deception and Shellan lore, you gain the Charming Liar skill feat. GM Advice, or How Would I Run This? Warning, this section of the video is intended only for GMs or prospective GMs. I will fully spoil major sections of this campaign from here on out. If you are a player, I strongly suggest stopping the video now, or at least using the timestamps to skip to the outro. You've been warned. Like I said near the beginning of this video, this is the most fun I've ever had reading a Paizo adventure path. The writers of Curtain Call were having a ton of fun when they wrote this story, and it clearly shows. That being said, this campaign is absolutely not for everyone. If your group wants a decent amount of combat, I would suggest Fist of the Ruby Phoenix. Similarly, if they want a decent mix of combat, exploration, and social encounters, I would suggest Stolen Fate. Curtain Call focuses on roleplay above everything else, and if your group wants to roll dice and hit things, this is probably not the right fit for them. Before I go too deep into my own GM advice, I want to highly recommend the Curtain Call video from the YouTube channel How It's Played. They've done an excellent job of reviewing and summarizing the campaign in its entirety, and they focus much more on the perspective of the GM. It's a great video, so definitely check it out. One aspect of the story, which might not be apparent at the beginning of Curtain Call, is that this campaign coincides with the God's Reign, the murder of Gorum at the hands of a Chakik, which results in the reigning of Gorum's divine essence upon the surface of Golarion. To understand this event, I suggest reading the War of Immortals sourcebook. Less important, but still relevant, is the God's Reign novel and the Pray for Death adventure. For the most up-to-date understanding of the gods, I also suggest Lost Omen's Divine Mysteries. None of these 4 books are required reading, but if you have the time, interest, and money to read them, they can provide some nice context, and are solid reads besides. Similarly, if you're looking for more details on Kintargo and Vyre as the central locations for this AP, I would strongly suggest reading the gazetteers on each city, published in Hell's Rebels Books 1 and 3 respectively. These articles, while a little out of date, provide comprehensive views on both Kintargo and Vyre, and can go a long way toward fleshing out your understanding of these 2 plot-important urban centers. From a mechanical perspective, this campaign uses a lot of subsystems, and I mean a lot. As I was reading, it felt like more than 20% of the text was devoted to explaining mechanics for the various social and skill challenges the players would face. That wasn't a problem, mind you, as I found the systems fairly easy to grasp, but it was definitely a lot to take in. I mentioned near the beginning of this video that your group might need to reach an understanding of how you want social challenges to run, and I want to re-emphasize that point here. If your group is willing to really commit to their characters and resolve disputes with creative roleplay in lieu of dice rolls, then throw some of these subsystems out and have fun with it. Don't feel the need to stick to these systems as written, and I fully encourage you to tweak them as needed. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Communication is the key to a good gaming experience. Talk with your players and figure out what's going to work best for you. Getting a bit more specific, I suggest tightening up a few of the side quests to minimize the number of times the PCs need to leave Kintargo and Vyre. In my mind, Kintargo should be the main setting for the story, since the people of the city are who the PCs want to entertain with their opera. At the same time, PCs should first see Vyre as a mysterious and dangerous place where they don't feel welcome, but which they must visit from time to time. A foreboding sense of vague familiarity with Vyre will really help set the stage for the crazy plot turns in Book 3. To that end, I suggest limiting the number of major excursions the PCs should take outside of Kintargo and Vyre to 2. One trip to go get Oriel in the Shackles, and another to locate a composer throughout the Inner Sea. I suggest reworking the other adventures which draw the party away from the 2 main cities. In the case of the Show-Stopping Sets event on page 35 of Book 2, it should be fairly straightforward to retool Tromard Roldheim into a black market dealer willing to meet with the PCs either in Old Kintargo or in Vyre. This prevents the party from having to travel to Riddleport, and also gives the PCs another connection point with the local criminal underworld, helping to tie together the A and B plots. In the case of the Bird in the Hand event on page 37 of Book 2, you might consider changing the search for the rare bird into a rescue of that bird from poachers, or a theft of that bird from a cruel owner. This could allow the focus to remain on Kintargo, and might allow you to incorporate more underworld NPCs, or some high society villains who the PCs can needle. Finally, in the case of Flowers to Die For, also on page 37 of Book 2, I have a pretty ambitious idea. By this point in the story, the PCs are well known as producers on a major theatrical production. If they take too much time away from the city, they might jeopardize the opera's chance at success. Big producers don't run errands on their own. They hire runners to do that work for them. And this is my suggestion. Have the players hire a small team of runners to go get the flowers for them. But here's the catch. The runners are also played by the players. After the runners are hired, they set out for Sarkoris to pick up the flowers. You then focus on the main story in Kintargo, but every once in a while, you have a session where you cut back to the runners. They are experiencing a lot more trouble than they expected when they took this job, and the players can take a break from the role-play-heavy Kintargo plot by playing out an episodic quest featuring more conventional combat encounters. As the runners progress, they can report back to the producers, assuring them that everything is under control, even as they deal with increasingly absurd twists and turns. This would involve a fair amount of homebrew for a GM, but I think it has a lot of potential to break up the intrigue in a fun way. Full disclosure, I got the inspiration for this idea from the Tom Cruise negotiation sequences in Tropic Thunder, so I would run these as ridiculous and over-the-top as possible. And, finally, I want to discuss the Cult of the Ashen Man, the red herring villain for most of Books 1 and 2. The Curtain Call AP suggests using graffiti to represent the rising prominence of the cult in Kintargo, and, as much as I like this idea, I think you actually need to go a little further. I suggest adding some small tidbits into the daily operations at the opera to help emphasize the rising threat and danger of the Ashen Man cult. Maybe some stagehands have a friend who disappeared, with only ashy footprints in their apartment as a clue. Maybe the PCs pass a crime scene on their way to the theater one day, one where an Ashen Man cultist was found dead. Maybe the sponsors of the opera feel the need to send security forces to the theater, or information to the PCs about cultist activity. Maybe one of the prominent artists from the art show in Book 1 is kidnapped, or even murdered by Ashen Man cultists. All of these events could contribute to a growing understanding that the cult is a danger to the city. That way, when the cult is revealed to be a red herring in the main plot, the PCs will still have a sense of accomplishment for having saved Kintargo from a serious threat. Well, if you still want to play Curtain Call, then this video should have provided you with enough information to get started. If you and your group decide that this AP is for you, then I strongly suggest that each player read the official player's guide from Paizo, as it expands on what I've discussed here and provides an excellent detailed look at the city of Kintargo. I said it a few times in this video already, but I really enjoyed reading this adventure path. I love how over the top it gets, from the villains, to the environments, to the goal of producing an opera. And if you think everything I described sounds fun, trust me, I left the best and craziest part of this campaign left completely unaddressed. Next time, I'll be back to looking at the deities of the Pathfinder campaign setting, this time giving some much-needed attention to the small folk of Avestan. Up next is my look at the faith of Chaldira, halfling goddess of luck, bravery, and mischief. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.